Hello. I have not lost the top of my head. I am wearing my father's headgear from the Korean War. Um, as you can see, it's a cap. I've heard these called beanies. Um, you can call it a beanie if you want. I won't tell you what my father did in the Korean War, but um, he wore this cap. He dressed in that color behind me, and he painted his face black. And he carried an automatic weapon that he modified, and he carried tons of hand grenades. And he spent the entire war on the other side. And he loved every second of it. Um, no PTSD, nothing. So I'm wearing this because my father, despite his many faults, he was a fearless man. And um, in the Korean War, he volunteered for all the suicide missions, and he always came back. Um, and we're at a time when we really need to be fearless. Trump is fearless. You know what he's doing right now? He's golfing. I've been watching Rudy Giuliani, Richard Grenell, Eric Trump, Donald Jr. They're all cheerful. They're all cheerful and confident. So they're not blowing smoke up your butts. Now, okay, I've made a couple of videos about what Trump did to prepare for this scenario. Um, Now, I have to speak in theoreticals. So let's say that theoretically there was massive mail in voter fraud. Um, if there was massive mail in voter fraud, we know that Trump warned us. He warned us for months. And in early 2017, the Department of Homeland Security designated voting as a critical infrastructure. And then um, in 2018, Trump created CISA specifically for the purpose of protecting the voting system. So if there were massive voter fraud, mail in ballot voter fraud, it would have been completely documented. It wouldn't have been allowed to happen. All critical infrastructure systems in the United States are under heavy surveillance. Um, the U.S. military is often detached to DHS in order to conduct surveillance. The FBI did a hell of a lot of surveillance of the mafia using wiretaps and filming, and we didn't know this until it was presented. It was presented in court mostly. Um, Now we know that the Supreme Court has ruled that all the late ballots in Pennsylvania have to be segregated from the rest. So the legal process is important. Obviously, the Supreme Court, the evidence presented to the Supreme Court made them order Pennsylvania to segregate their ballots. Um, so there's 7 states in question, and we're talking maybe 1 million fraudulent ballots. Now, theoretically, I didn't predict this because it's so stupid, but if you look at it as an act of total insane desperation, then it makes sense. So I have a question for you, and I want your opinions in the comments. Let's say that theoretically Trump has all the goods. There was surveillance done, physical surveillance done on the election infrastructure. There were wiretaps. There were, excuse me, these calls are never, they're never important. They're always junk calls. And if they are important, then whoever calls me is going to have to wait. I'm a hermit, and I did a video earlier with Saul Montes Bradley, and I got 2 phone calls. So it's that thing. It's like nobody ever calls, and the only time when I don't want them to call, they call. What was I saying? Okay, critical infrastructure in the United States is under surveillance. So there's going to be, if there was fraud committed, there's going to be a hell of a lot of evidence. And people are asking, well, if Trump knew this was going to happen, why didn't he stop it? Well, because you don't prevent crimes unless human lives are at stake. And, election fraud is not murder, it's not rape, it's not assault. You have to let them break the law so that you can charge them. And Trump has been warning about election fraud by mail-in ballot since 2013 at the latest. I believe that one of the first things Trump did when he became president was he started making a plan for this election. And obviously Trump infiltrated all the voting machines, the voting, I don't mean voting the machinery, I mean when they say he's a machine politician, this guy's a machine, the political machines. He infiltrated all them. And so they were able to present evidence in order to get the wiretapping and the survey. Okay, the physical surveillance with cameras and all of that. Designating voting critical infrastructure, you don't need, different laws apply. So dams are under surveillance, electrical grids, all of that. So it's very likely that, in fact, it's a dead certainty that, there was surveillance being done on the counting rooms and just everything like that. So if there was electoral fraud, then Trump has the evidence. Now, here's my question to you. I know what I want, but and Saul Montes Bradley convinced me what is best for the country. But we have 2 possibilities. One, Trump releases all the evidence and we see everything. And 2, Trump is declared the winner, but the evidence isn't released in order to protect the country from knowing just how bad everything was. So there's pros and cons for each one. So why don't you tell me your opinion on what you think is best for the country? If there was massive election fraud, should Trump release all the evidence in order to restore? Okay, if there was massive election fraud, then essentially the integrity of the electoral system is destroyed forever, um, because people will be convinced that no matter how they vote, their vote will be stolen. So the pros of releasing all the evidence are that people can see, oh, we were on top of this, we caught them all. The cons are that it will destroy an entire political party. Now, the pollsters are already dead in the water. They're gone. They got everything wrong. And if Trump withholds the evidence and the press has to admit that he won, they're destroyed. So the Democrats will live to fight another day if Trump withholds the evidence. And I happen to believe that this was a concerted effort, if it did happen. It was a concerted effort because you can see that the story was planted. Trump is not going to concede. He was asked over and over, are you going to concede? The polls are put out there to deliberately make people think that Biden was a shoo-in. So I think this was an all-hands-on-deck thing, if it happened. Social media is just banning people in a frenzy. And now they've declared Joe Biden the winner before the count has even been certified. And when Rudy Giuliani was talking about it, the press was saying, but the media has declared Biden the winner. How can you keep doing this? And Giuliani looked to the sky and said, oh, the media has declared. And he said, kids, the media doesn't get to decide who's going to be president. And it's true. The media has no say in who gets to be president. After Truman defeated Dewey, the press said it was a swindle. And as you recall, after Bush defeated Gore, Bush was called an illegitimate president until 9/11. So if Trump is declared the winner without showing us the evidence, then the press gets to call him illegitimate, the Democrats get to call him a dictator, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the pros of releasing all the evidence are that we get to see exactly how the electoral system was protected, and we get to see exactly how this theoretical massive fraud was done, and we get to see how it was countered. The cons of releasing all the evidence means the total destruction of the Democratic Party, which represents virtually or half the country. So the repercussions of that are actually incalculable. We would enter uncharted waters if we destroy the Democratic Party. I mean, we can't predict what would happen. Now, the pros of withholding the evidence are that the Democrats get to reform themselves without ever having had to admit to this massive coordinated effort. So in other words, they get to save face and they get to say, oh, we had no idea, we were depending on this, plenty of people get plausible deniability. And we avoid having this total split in the country with this complete, well, this conviction that one of our major parties committed the crime of the biggest crime in our history. The cons of withholding the evidence are that the press can say, "Oh, Trump's a dictator. He simply forced the courts into doing his will, just whatever." So the press will take a huge blow if we don't release the evidence. And if we do release the evidence, then all of Trump's enemies are dead. They can't come back from this. But the ramifications of wiping out all of Trump's enemies are so enormous that we don't really know what'll happen. So by releasing all the evidence, we enter a brand new territory. In essence, we're rebuilding the country from the beginning, from scratch. So there are pros and cons. I know that the vast majority of you would want all the evidence released. I do too. But I want your opinion on what you think is going to happen. Will Trump allow his enemies to save face and live to fight another day, and rely on them to learn from this and never do it again? Or will Trump completely destroy, just lay waste to the opposing party, the press? The pollsters are already done. They don't matter. Virtually every the Republicans who are now essentially burying Trump. Here's another factor. Personally, I think that this was Trump's plan all along. That he knew this was going to happen as soon as he took office. We know that he started planning for his reelection as soon as he took office. And Trump is smart enough that he did foresee this, because early in 2017 the DHS declared voting a critical infrastructure. And we don't know what steps were taken to detect mail-in ballot fraud. The fraud was so blatant. I just saw a story of a woman in Houston. Near Houston, she got 2 absentee votes from Arkansas. And the post office said, "Oh, it's because our machines mistook a phone number for the zip code." But as she pointed out, these 2 absentee ballots were from 2 completely different people, and their addresses bore no resemblance to her address. Richard Grenell said that he's found about 4,000 fraudulent votes just using open sources in Nevada. And Grenell's very happy. He's very cheerful. The only one who's really visibly angry is Corey Lewandowski, but Lewandowski is he's like me. He's a very unforgiving guy. If I were up in front of a microphone in front of the press, I would be less than polite. Giuliani, Grenell, Trump, Pence, they're where I want to get. Trump is angry. They're all angry, but they control their anger, um, and they don't. I mean, there's an old joke about an ant, a male ant, climbing a female elephant's leg and promising her that he's going to be gentle with her when they do it. And Trump views his opponents as ants. So you can't get angry at an ant. You know, I did have ants invade my bed, um, and I didn't see them. And I turned off the light and I lay down and I started feeling this crawling sensation over my entire body. And I jumped up, and this was during a drought. And um, the ants were headed toward a glass of water on my bedstand, and for some reason they decided to make my bed into their bivouac. So I woke up and I was covered head to toe with ants, and I was hysterical with rage. So I went and I got an insect spray, and first I went and I showered off. I came back and I killed all the little bastards with an insect spray, and I found the little tiny microscopic hole where they'd come in, and I plugged it with epoxy, and I was enraged for weeks. So they were just ants. They're not even sentient. They just do what they're programmed to do. But I was furious. I hated them, and I was on this ant vendetta. And so I'm not like Trump. I have a very serious rage problem. But if you look at everybody except for Corey Lewandowski, they're cheerful, they're happy. Trump is golfing. So I know that almost all of you agree with me that all the evidence should be released. But I want to know what you think is going to happen. Will all the evidence be released if there was, in fact, massive voter fraud? Will all the evidence be released and then we enter completely unknown? We're in unexplored territory, and we don't know what the fallout will be. Or will Trump's enemies be allowed to save face in order to prevent the country from entering that unexplored territory? What do you think will happen? Click.